Well, welcome everyone to Masters of Web 3, episode 11. I can't believe we have 11 episodes already. Today we have Anastasia Uglova, who is the head of communications and ecosystems development at Lighthouse. I found out about Lighthouse a couple of weeks ago after meeting Anastasia, and I was just so excited to hear about just conceptually what it is, and also just all the neurons in my brain started to fire as I started to think about all of the potential applications and use cases of what y'all are building over at Lighthouse. So do you want to first of all introduce yourself, Anastasia, and then talk a little bit about what Lighthouse
Sure.
is up to?
Well, the name you already know, and I guess it's probably best to kind of share my story of how I ended up in Lighthouse. So I'll try not to give a
Very
monologue.
cool.
Maybe I'll like give it in parts, and then you can interject if you
Yeah, and
decide.
maybe we should also just start by saying that Lighthouse is an open metaverse navigation engine, kind of in most simplistic terms, like
Mhm.
the Google of the metaverse. But there's obviously so much
Yeah.
nuance to that. So yeah, tell us about your story, and then we'll go deeper into open
Yeah.
metaverse navigation and search
Well,
engine.
it's really fascinating that I work at Lighthouse now, where I started just earlier this month, actually. But we've been in conversation since almost since the day they decided to start the company. I found out about this was so I was in Cornell from February to April. Cornell is a fellowship program for people who are interested in exploring deeper into crypto and very many different tracks. So not just DeFi or NFTs, but like token design and ethics, just so many different things. And so the CEO, Jonathan, was also a Cornell Fellow. And at the time, from February to April, I was also finishing up my Master of Science in Information Security and Privacy at UT Austin. And I was doing all this tweeting and writing on my mirror about the research I'm doing, which is all about how do we preserve digital privacy and consent in increasingly immersive spaces. And so he reached out. I think when the company was maybe him and the co-founder, and like maybe one product person was like, "Hey, you just do that, but you do it here. You come here." And I was like, "Hold on, wait, let me finish my master's," for months until I finally couldn't ignore that this was the right call, because quite literally, the title of my thesis is averting Cambridge Analytica in the metaverse. So I was writing, everything I was writing is telescoping out several years to like when we live in an internet that is actually a spatial and immersive and persistent internet. And what does that look like? And how do we need to adapt our privacy standards, but also our like cognitive technologies and social expectations in order to live well with technology. And I really want to highlight the idea of like living well with technology and not just inheriting something we accidentally built and we're like, oh darn, well, we've done it this time.
I think a lot about like how cities, I've lived in a lot of different cities and towns across the US, and this is my own little pet theory. I mean, Manhattan's a grid and Manhattan is very orderly in a lot of ways, but it's like but you have Broadway running through it, which is like, from what I understand, Broadway was like the original kind of road on the island of Manhattan. And it was used by indigenous folks who lived here, and it wasn't a grid system, but it shows like how we build around kind of the existing structures that are already here. But then it's like I lived in lots of like weird towns that the system the road structure seemed to have like no logic to them whatsoever. It just seemed kind of like somebody put a church and then they were like, well, we need to get a road to the church, so let's go ahead and just pave one real quick, and then we'll create one, cut down some trees or whatever. And then it was like, okay, well, now we have a market. Okay, well, we have to get people to the market somehow, so let's just put another road in over here. And then I lived in Utah for a year, and the roads there are very orderly, and the grid system is very logical. There's like First Street, Second Street, Third Street, and then there's north, south, like it goes north and south, east and west. And so anyway, it gets me thinking about like this metaverse, the spatial web that we're building, and like given everything we've learned from kind of the trial and error of web 2, we really have an opportunity to be much more systematic and thoughtful about how we build it, so we're not just sticking a church down in the middle of the metaverse or a town hall or whatever, or a plaza or something like that, and then trying to hurry up and funnel people to it as fast as we possibly can. Like, we can take our time and be thoughtful here. And you saw that.
Yeah, and actually, as I was listening to you speak, what was coming to mind is this idea of playing whack-a-mole with um, with right? So it's like you're solving for like this one narrow thing, like we need a church here, and then like because we didn't kind of have a fully encompassing problem set that describes the full granularity of the things they have to solve for, then like something else popped up here that is this externality of the thing that we solved too narrowly. So now it's like, oh well, there's a church but there's no road. Okay, well now we got to pave the road, but we didn't actually include in that problem statement that there's trees or maybe an animal crossing or some other thing that's really important to the ecosystem there. So now we have to play whack-a-mole with that. And you can go like the totally other direction and just over engineer everything and just central planet, which is really not where we want to go. And maybe this is where we go back to like, how did I end up in crypto as someone from Russia? We don't want central planning, but I think kind of baselines of what are some standards that comport with human thriving that we want to operate under or operate on. What are some agreements that we need to make about how to build and how not to build? Like, what are some lessons from actual other engineering fields and not just software engineering, like civil engineering? And how do we create systems that are safe and good and open enough that people can exercise their creativity in building things, but it's not haphazard and it's not dangerous?
Yeah, yeah. Now, were you born in Russia?
I was born in Moscow, and that's a really big reason. Makes no
Yeah,
sense,
yeah. Is that
probably. If you're listening, you're like, how does that make sense? Why is she in the metaverse? But it kind of makes
well?
sense.
Surprisingly, you're not the first person from Russia who I've met in Web3 who feels passionate about
Oh, interesting.
privacy and how data is used. How
Oh,
much did that influence your academic course of study
yeah.
and ultimately your career trajectory?
Yeah, very, very much, very intimately. I guess I was always interested in identifying the conditions that lead to human thriving, and then identifying the conditions that lead to human suffering, and then optimizing for the ones that thrive, and like deprioritizing, de-optimizing for the ones that cause us to suffer or bring up like the worst demons of our nature. And why I was interested in that is because I watched my country fall apart. I was 8 years old. It was weird. Like people don't usually experience something like that. But when you do at a young age, you go, well, I'm going to need an analytical lens to figure that out because that was odd.
Right. It's almost like this adaptation that takes over because the world is like so overwhelming that you're like, okay, we have to create some structures in order to like process and plan for this. Now, you said you were 8 years old. What event specifically was it at 8 that happened? Like when you said you watched the country fall apart, which event was that?
Yeah. So, yeah, the 1991 August coup, where the communists tried to take over the Russian White House. Gorbachev was on vacation in Crimea, and then Yeltsin stood up for democracy and glasnost, and basically staved off the communist takeover, and became the leader of the Russian free world, if you will. But then he drank himself into an early death. Um, so we immigrated shortly after, I think like 7 or 8 months later. So when I got to New York, I was 8 years old, but I already knew like whenever I get to college, I'm going to study political science because I figured I'm going to go into politics to figure out how to make the world run the right way. And I did end up in politics. I spent a bunch of time in Washington, D.C., working in the Senate and think tanks. I had a political blog that was popular at the time, but I quickly realized that you don't actually change the world through politics. It's a job like any job, and you spend half of it campaigning to try to get yourself reelected rather than actually like affecting change. So I ended up going into media. So I worked at NBC for a while, but really got far away from the original question, which is like, what are the
Sorry.
what's that?
Oh, your original
Oh
question. Okay,
no,
I
I
thought
got
you were saying.
from my like existential life question. Like I ended up at NBC, and I'm like, this is a great job. I'm here for 5 years, but how do I make the world a better place? And so I
Yeah.
ended up going to East Africa for 6 years. I was working in women's education and technology. So I had this like woman in tech career for 6 years in East Africa. And after a while, I thought I've got to get back to the States. It's probably time. So I've fulfilled a large part of my mission in helping to improve conditions for people. But now how do I do that in the States? Like, what does it mean to do tech in America after doing 6 years of that in Rwanda? Like there I'm working on like setting up education systems and campus networking. And like, that's not the same problem or the same set of problems in tech that people are dealing with in the States. And that's when the Cambridge Analytica scandal happened. 2016,
Ah,
2017.
so it was almost like a gift on a silver
Yeah,
platter.
it was
Like
like,
the universe was like, here you go. Here's a meaty problem that you can just
yeah,
sink your teeth right into.
exactly. For me, I was watching it like, oh, so that's what I'm going to go do in tech in America as a US citizen of Russian birth who feels desperately involved and somehow responsible in a strange, weird, and indirect way for what is happening in American elections due to
Yeah.
the way that we mismanage technology. So that's how I ended up in digital privacy.
I love that origin story. And I just will say that that's one of the reasons why I love Web3 and crypto so much is because everybody has a fascinating origin story and a fascinating background. And I feel like do you feel like this space now is broad enough and provides enough opportunities to really like kind of like live the full expression of all of these ideas and like be able to solve all of the problems that you want to solve? Like, do you kind of feel like that, aha, like, yes, like we're finally into it now. This has been what I was looking for. Um, because I know that I felt that as like kind of I felt like a sore thumb a little bit in the traditional financial journalism world, but I wasn't fully an artist, but I wasn't fully a financial reporter. And now I kind of feel like I have space to breathe a little bit and I can really like express, I think, the fullness of all the things that I want to explore and I can serve in the ways that I want to serve. Do you feel like Web3 is that for you? Like, have you arrived, so to speak?
Yeah, it is incredibly gratifying to show up as fully myself at work. I noticed this, and I articulated it to my partner. I was like, "This is I've been happy and lucky with the jobs I've had, but I've always had to kind of bifurcate and create another persona for work. Even if it's like a super chill job and it's not too corporate, I still have to like be my work self. But working in Web3, working in the metaverse, I just am me. I can meme my way through Slack all day long and it's still like relevant because people speak that language as well. So I very much feel like myself and I feel like people welcome you in general to show up as whoever you are. And that is so on brand because like one of the big questions with metaverse is like, what identity do you want to be? How do you want to show up? And how do you want your identity to be respected? Do you have 10 of them? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Let's just figure out how we're going to manage that. So
Some people are like, let's make 10 different wallets with
yeah,
10 different NFT
yeah,
collections
yeah.
to express all 10 different sides of my personality. But I do love that.
Mm,
Okay, so I want to ask you one more question about your personal
yeah,
background, and then I want to dive into Lighthouse and kind of like, you know,
yeah.
I want to. I want to go there next, but what was it that made you decide to publish your master's thesis on Mirror? I know that you
Uh,
said you were writing about avoiding Cambridge Analytica in the metaverse.
mhm.
Why Mirror? Why did you choose Mirror?
Um,
And actually, maybe tell people what it is for those who don't know.
yeah. So Mirror is, I guess, the best way to see it is that it's a decentralized version of what people understand Medium to be. So it's a self-publishing kind of organized blogging platform with really nice, UI. But I wanted to publish where I wanted to reach the audience that I want to convince. So when I started focusing on decentralized identity last summer, which is it's not even due to grad school that I figured this out. It's me. I was not getting anywhere with what I was experiencing or learning in grad school in terms of how do I solve consumer privacy, and I pretty much like through my own kind of research and trying to break down the primitives that produce surveillance capitalism. I kept coming back to like the first one that gives rise to it, and unless we solve for it, we'll keep getting it, whether we're on um, you know, centralized platforms or decentralized protocols will keep arriving at surveillance capitalism if we don't solve for user identity, user owned identity. So like identity that's provisioned by the user to the user and not by another company. So as soon as a company provisions you your identity, you're already beholden to another entity and there's a power dynamic there. So I just kept coming back to this and I realized how urgent it was for people to understand the primacy of identity in crypto. And around like September, November, December of last year, the only thing people were talking about was NFTs, like the only thing. And it seemed like that was as deep as the space was willing to go. Um, I remember talking to somebody who's sort of, I guess I'll say like a capital allocator in this space, someone who can like put money or people behind problems. And I was telling this person about why I think identity is so key, and it's not enough just to fall back on wallets. This person said to me, yeah, you came into this space through identity, and that's just not very sexy. Like you should explore like GameFi or DeFi, get into all those. And I was like, okay.
I mean, what was getting all of the capital and attention and resources? It was gaming. I mean, gaming has been around for quite a while, and I think like that was an easy sell when it came to NFTs because people were already buying and selling skins and kind of like wearables for their avatars and things like that, weapons or whatever. The other day I was like, can we just like decide not to have weapons in the metaverse? Can we make that decision? I think it's a little too late. But anyway, yeah. So I think that was like an easy sell. But then what you saw NFTs were getting most of the attention and resources, and that was mostly like PFP projects and kind of like art and digital art drops and like memberships, like the utility that NFTs provide. Why do you think it was that that got all the attention and not identity? Why is identity not sexy enough?
There's obvious money behind art, right? You could sell it. There's anything that attracts money is going to attract a lot of noise and people who are willing to and wanting to make like really quick cash. Um, and that was the same thing with Plato and gaming as well, which at the time that was before like the Ronin hack. So people were excited and thought that crypto finally found a use case. It was like Axie Infinity works. Um,
And people were kind of like uplifting it because like talking about how it was a good source of passive income or even like a full income for people in certain economies. And yeah, and for those who don't know, I'm sure everybody knows about the Ronin hack, but it was Axie Infinity's Ronin bridge, right? To And then it was hacked and millions were stolen.
we're,
I think I
we're
just said
sold.
stoled.
You got sold. That's like,
Can we make that a thing?
yeah. Oh my
um,
God. That's so much better than down bad.
do you
So
think that had to happen for people to start to see that identity and security are now sexy?
no, I don't actually think that having like a data breach or a scam is like, so privacy is different from information security. Those are totally different things. Like
Okay,
people,
yeah, talk about that a little
total,
bit.
sure. Well, so like when people think about Cambridge Analytica, they think there was a data breach. There wasn't a data breach. The 87 million Facebook profiles that were harvested for information were freely available because of Facebook's inadequate privacy protections. Like it was all consensual. Um,
Yeah, by kind
so
of by default because nobody really read the fine print.
right, and because why should anybody read the fine print? Why would you expect if you're a civil engineer, if you're an aerospace engineer and you build an aircraft, would you expect the people flying inside of it to understand how you built it and why you built it and to make sound decisions about like tough engineering questions? But this is what we do in like software engineering. We expect people who are not experts, who have other jobs, who are like pharmacists and like, I don't know, like owners of other companies and doctors to like take valuable time out of their lives to sit there and read hours upon hours of terms of service. And then it's not just reading it, you have to understand it, and then you have to compare and contrast in order to actually make a consensual, fully agentic choice about something. You have to study it. So there was a research study that was done, I want to say it was in 2010, when there was a lot less information on the internet, so like fewer bits and bytes. And it said something like for a person to make a sound choice about a term of service, they need to spend 9 productive weeks studying. And that was in 2010. So like 2022, there's a lot more choice and a lot more information. So you probably need to spend more weeks. So like, do I want my doctors and pharmacists to be reading terms of service when actually the professionals that build these environments should be in charge of that? But we just like pass this on to the end user in software engineering. Cause I think like in tech, we don't take ourselves very seriously. We don't really treat ourselves as professionals. We think we're playing games here, but we're building environments.
Do you think that that is a product of or exacerbated by the kind of startup culture and the urgency that is created around like getting things to market as quickly as possible, being competitive, first mover advantages? Like, do you think that that creates the conditions to where these critical steps are put secondary on the priority list?
Yeah, there's actually a convergence of things that that lead to tech professionals not really understanding the full weight of the responsibility that they hold in their hands. The first is that the way that like most funding works in the space is it's really risky capital. So that means that you have to impose really high growth obligations on your founders because you're expecting like everything to just go down bad, and then one company is going to go to the moon and carry the rest of your portfolio. So that means that you're putting this pressure on founders to make decisions that favor user growth over maybe some other metric, which is like what would be the right or safe or ethical or kind of pro-social choice. You you deprioritize that because you've got to prioritize growth because that's why your incentives are designed. So like one of the questions is, are the fiduciary duties that we are that we understand are important, and that's how law and finance works. Do they still service us in an environment where technology is a place where we spend most of our time? We spend most of our time in tech versus like in a building or a bridge or flying an aircraft. But like those environments have all these like very important standards that you can't, if you build a bridge and you get it out to market before the other guy builds the bridge, but it crumbles in the bay, like, do you still have an engineering career?
Yes.
No.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. You're so right. But we don't think, and this is where I love the term spatial web. We don't think about the web as a spatial place. We don't think about it
Yeah.
as a place that we are occupying. We don't think of it as a tool or an infrastructure that we're
Hmm.
using, even though it absolutely is. It's like
Yeah.
it's a dimension in which we're living our
Hmm.
lives. Okay,
Yeah.
so we were I'm taking us in so many directions. I knew this was going to happen because I knew
Yeah.
that we had so much to
So
talk
much
about.
to talk about.
Okay, so we were talking about the difference though between consumer privacy and
Mm.
data
And
breaches.
InfoSec, yeah.
Am I getting those right? That distinction?
Yeah, so information security and privacy security. So InfoSec is concerned with protecting your data, like your PII, your personally identifiable information.
Like your social security number, your driver's
Yeah,
license
so
number, your
if those are
address.
right, if those are concealed, kept confidential, if like they retain integrity wherever they're stored, if they're available to whoever has the read and write access to them at the right time, cool, you've got yourself some information security. It's a great lockbox. But it doesn't say anything about your metadata, right? The data that describes the data. Like,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's
Your
not a social security
activity.
number. Yeah, the activity that like someone showed up and hung around for this amount of time, and they actually show up on this corner of the metaverse or like on this web page for every single day at this time for this amount of time. That's, you can correlate all of that. You can correlate and re-identify that, and that's actually what ad tech is. This isn't like rocket science. It's not even science. It's really just rudimentary. There's companies that just do this. It's like,
Yeah, and they're doing that, like, they're looking at how much time we spend on Instagram, how much time we spend on
yeah,
Facebook, how much
to figure
time
out, right, to
we're
figure out like when are we the most likely to buy something, like at what time could I give this person a certain treatment, what type of treatment, what's going to get them to like buy the sneaker that I want them to buy, or in a more malicious way, like if I'm a bad actor like a government that's trying to sow unrest, like what group can I put in front of them that's like stoking the fans of their like anger or hatred so that they can get even more radicalized. Like this is how things work, and or worked in 2016, which is why I got so excited or slash horrified and said, well, gosh darn it, I got to go do something about this. We haven't figured that part out yet. Like we still haven't figured out how to deal with metadata and digital privacy, which is not information security. We haven't figured out how to handle privacy. Um, but we're now actually adding layers of complexity on top of it. So it's not just our likes. So this is interesting. With 200 likes, this was a study that was done like right around the time of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, when it was discovered. With 200 likes, a machine learning model can determine with greater likelihood and accuracy than your like best friends whether you'll divorce your partner just on your like patterns, right? So when you add like when you add more data to that, like your biometrics, if you're wearing a VR headset, or how long your avatar is staring at a thing, if the avatar is looking for a long time, or maybe like their heart quickens because they're wearing an Oura ring or something like.
And they get so excited, and like if their heart rate spikes by, I don't know, 5 beats per
Yeah.
minute or 10 beats per minute, then they're more
Mhm.
likely to buy it or whatever,
Exactly.
or
And so all of this
join a
stuff is
cause.
totally. I mean, you could go in a good direction or a bad direction, but the
Yeah.
point is, who's deciding? Whom are you giving power over your choices? Do
Yeah.
you have do you retain full consent over your body? And I
Right.
say that because we should start to see the internet and digital spaces as extensions of the real world, because we spend most of our time right now in a digital space. So what's the metaverse? It's just more of this
Right.
in a more immersive environment. Like, we're already in the metaverse, just earlier stages of it.
And do you
I
think people
spend
see it that way at all? Like, do you think people see it as
no,
a as an issue of bodily autonomy?
no, because technology evolves faster than our like cognitive adaptations to
Yeah.
deal with how technology evolves.
Yeah.
So we invent things, and then it takes us many, many more years to understand its implications on individuals and on society in aggregate, because we just don't have the cognitive technologies to evolve as quickly. It takes like
It takes
sexual selection and generations,
right,
right?
and just experiencing it and then having
Yeah,
that like kind of oh shit moment where you're like,
right.
"Oh, I left myself vulnerable in that moment." I mean, I just had one of those moments with Voxer, for example, and I've been using Voxer for like over a year now, maybe 2 years, and I didn't realize that I didn't even realize my location was turned on until somebody said, "Hey, by the way, I can see that you're at the airport." And they like sent me a pin of where I was, and I had no idea, like it just didn't even occur to me, you know? And so it's like it just takes enough of those moments to make you be like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to clean this up and here's how I'm going to choose to use this. Here's how I'm going to choose to engage with this particular app or whatever."
But let me ask you about that. Like, is it realistic to expect you or to anyone else to study the available options for their privacy and preferences, and to do that for 10, 20, 30, 100 different environments and apps? This is where it comes back to identity, because our identities are fragmented across all these different apps, games, environments, protocols. We have to take upon ourselves this like superhuman and unrealistic task of managing our identities and preferences and menus across all these different technologies. So like, the tech has evolved, we have not evolved our ability to actually do that. So the only way to start to attack that problem is for me to have my own menu of access controls. Like, I'm the one that you want, right? You want me in your game, you want me in your environment, you want me to use your product. So read my data rails, read my set of preferences, and adapt the service you provide to me according to what I have already determined as a default option. Like, no, I don't want
Oh
my
my
location.
god. Oh
Yeah.
my god.
Right.
Okay, so because basically, so let's flip this scenario around. So like with Voxer, for example, I accepted that the default was that my location was going to be sharing without
Mhm.
realizing that I had accepted that. And
Mhm.
I'm sure that somewhere I consented to that happening. And if I decided that I wanted to sue Voxer because they leaked my information, the lawsuit would be moot. It wouldn't stand in court, right?
Mhm.
So let's reverse that then to like a an ideal scenario, or even dare I say a Web3 scenario, if
Mhm.
we do our job.
Mhm.
It would be where I have what, like a KYC token or something like that, that kind of or like an identity token, that if if I if Voxer wants me as their customer
Mhm.
or as their user, then
They
like,
agree to your terms.
okay, so how would that work?
So before we get to that, I want to just backtrack a little bit on that you were talking about consent in a really important way.
Okay.
What wouldn't hold up in court? Um,
Okay, yes, let's do it.
this is really
I feel like
important.
I feel like I need to take notes so that we just hit all of the important topics of this conversation.
Yeah.
So, if you're listening, sorry if this is a little bit wackadoodle, but that's how these conversations go. And if you like this conversation, go to a crypto conference because it's just a lot of this and it's amazing.
So I wonder why, if you go to the court of law, and because someone has touched you inappropriately, and the other person says, yeah, but I asked her and she said yes, but the person was maybe inebriated or too young to give consent, that case gets thrown out in court. But on the web, but I asked and she said yes is exactly what it takes to pass the bar for consent. Even though you aren't capable of giving consent because you don't have the necessary information to make an agentic informed choice, um, right? So that's one. And two, you're also inebriated on the web because a lot of the so when you see those cookie pop-ups, for example, how long does it take you to figure out how to actually decline cookies? Like you have to click, it's you can just click accept. That's super easy. It's designed for you to
Now
make that
there's three options. There's like accept all, accept only the necessary ones, or
choice.
decline
And you
all.
have to
But
find that. You have to go like manage options. And then there's like all these different things you have to go to do to make sure you've actually said no, instead of the default being reject all except for the necessary ones. That's called dark pattern design. Dark pattern
mm,
design. So it's intended to get you to do what the user experience designer wants you to do, which is not always nefarious. Like it's nice to move the user through a journey that's easy and frictionless, but when that frictionless journey also takes away your optionality or your awareness of the choices you're making, that's actually quite nefarious. That's dark patterns. And so we actually it's actually very pernicious that in a court of law you couldn't actually say, well, I didn't want to give consent for this app to track my location, but I'm under a great amount of stress from all the different places that are asking me for consent, and I don't know how to make those choices, and I'm not an expert. Actually, I do something totally different with my professional life, and it's your job to actually design environments that are conducive with pro-social goals that don't undermine my consent and my agency. So that's one that's a really important point to make before we answer the second question, which was
how would it work ideally? And if
yeah.
Web3 developers do their jobs,
Yeah.
like what would be the ideal outcome in this like brave new world that we're building?
So interestingly, um, there's something called the decentralized identifier. Like I don't know
Okay.
if you've heard of like bids
Well, I've heard of
and
KYC tokens. Is that the
yeah.
same thing?
Part of it, the KYC token is really just something that says, hey, I've passed KYC somewhere else and I can present to you this token that doesn't show you everything about my information, but just shows proof that I passed KYC. So that's
And
kind of
that's more
like,
of like an enterprise use case, right? Like if
yeah,
somebody needed it to give me a loan or something like that, they could
exactly.
see just that one specific information about whether
Yeah.
it was creditworthy or something like that.
And you'd want to be able to map that token to my identity, to wherever I store my identity. So I don't want to get too technical here. It's just instead of using terms like decentralized identity and verifiable credentials, I'm just going to say user owned identity. So I want to own my own little identity, and I've got a little box in which I put all the stuff that pertains to my identity, like my KYC token in case I want to hang out with a bank or like apply for a loan. If I want to show up to a game, and the game wants to know that I'm of age, I just show the proof of my age without actually showing them the actual date, the full date of birth. Um, and I don't need to store that information at that game. They can just look it up, like look me up, and I give consent to show exactly what they need to see. And I can, in my little access control panel that's user owned and user provisioned, I have my default preferences. So I toggle between like, okay, in this set of environments or this set of conditions, I default to yes or like no. And then if I'm presented with a consent moment in the metaverse, let's say that I haven't actually declared, then maybe I get a question like, hey, how would you like to proceed here? And I can say that in my little control panel, and then the game or the Zoom app or whatever it is that I'm using adapts the service they provide me based on the preferences and consent choices that I make. That's in my own little decentralized user owned control panel.
It kind of sounds like just a more universal application of like the Zoom video on or video off preference, where some people it's the default is that you can keep the video on, and some people the default is to keep the video off. And if the video is off, I always put mine as video off because again, I would rather default to having less like fewer vulnerabilities, or I would default to having more privacy. And then if I choose to reveal myself, I can turn my video on, but the default is that I'm protected, right?
And you should be able to determine like under what conditions and to whom do you want to have video on or off. And the only way to manage this is if you're managing it in one place and everywhere else indexes you, instead of trying to manage it across 10 or 15 or 20 different places.
I have always wondered recently why. I'm like, how many times have I entered my birth date out into the universe? And I'm just like, and it really isn't necessary. Like, it's kind of like when you go to the store and you try to buy alcohol, right? And they say like if you look over 30, I think in some states that's the law. Like if somebody looks over 30, then just assume and just give it to them. It's like you don't need to check their exact birthday in order to just make sure that they're of age, right? Um, and that's not necessary information. And it's really interesting that we've just taken for granted that it's necessary to give your birthday out 5 times a day.
In my thesis, I call this data exhaust. It's just the exhaust of our data that's just flitting about after our interactions, that just stays there because we're not minimizing it. We have no means to control it. And that's one of the other primitives that produces surveillance capitalism, just random little bits of data hanging out, that we don't know how to control. Yeah.
Whew, yeah, and I mean it's become normal now, I think, for a lot of people to just get like spam calls and they're just like, well, whatever, it's another spammer, like I just decline. I mean, I don't answer my phone anymore because I'm just like the people who know me know how to text, like know how to contact me, and if you're calling me, I probably don't know you. And that's a really frightening way to live your life. Like why is that normal? you know? Um
Yeah. I'm
ah.
terrified of my phone. Like, please don't call me. Please let me know first. Please text me. Have the courtesy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is really great information and really important. You published your thesis on this on Mirror,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
you recently posted a Twitter thread about how how that experience was such a success for many different reasons. For one, it had got a great response from people. Two, you said that you felt like you were actually contributing real value beyond just what you said was self-actualization, meaning like a lot of people go to college, or they go to university, they get a PhD, they write a thesis, and they feel actualized. But I think a lot of academics have the experience of that information living in an academic library. People need a JSTOR account in order to access the research and read it. But you provided it to your followers and got a great response and really saw validation that this idea was contributing real value to the world, and actually helping and serving beyond just like a cool theory that you came up with. Or talk about that experience a little bit, and like and how many people read it, and um yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. This is it. It goes back to the question of why I published this on Mirror. There's so much academic literature that just stays siloed in academia. So after all that effort to put together a really cogent argument for something, if it doesn't reach the intended audience that can actually affect that change, then what is the point of it all? And I see this a lot in academia. It's just like people studying stuff and then yelling about it. Like, why is it being built this way? We really ought to build differently. And then not actually going to where the builders are building and taking the step and making the effort to make sure that we're crossing that aisle. We're putting that information in front of people who are in a position to take action on it. And so it was important for me not to just like write a thesis and then have my professor say, "Yep, you did good," but actually it's real. Like I believe I'm very confident in what I've written in my thesis, as like if we reproduce these four conditions in any environment, we will build a surveillance state. So like let's not delude ourselves with decentralization as being the bulwark against surveillance capitalism, because that's just like marketing nonsense that we say to ourselves. We basically delude ourselves into thinking that just because we're moving out of platforms and moving onto protocols, we're done. Like, no, we've barely gotten started. And so I wanted to put that in front of the people that I needed to influence. It's the same thing in academia in terms of how we educate software engineers. So going back to the other question about how do we build, how do we create an industry of professionals instead of like people that are just experimenting, running human experiments at scale, but not realizing the weight of responsibility that they hold in their hands as engineers. We don't present ethics in the course of a software engineering education. And if we do talk about tech ethics, it's like considered like this cutesy social impact thing that like some social impact DAO is doing. And like, that's so nice that you're doing that, but it's not going to work in the real world. However, in the medical field, you don't get to become a doctor unless you practice medical ethics. And if you're found to be an unethical doctor, you don't get to practice medicine anymore. In law, right? You, if you, if you break legal ethics, you get disbarred. And these are serious things that people are proud to uphold. But in software engineering, we just don't train that. It's not part of the like mental model for how to be a professional in technology. And that's because we don't teach it that way. And then the people who so there's two people that can change this because it's not academia. Academia moves too slow. So either you're a founder and you can educate your team and or only hire people that understand the tech ethics, that understand how to evaluate trade-offs in design decisions they make, understand user-centric ethical design, understand things like just really even thinking like an economist. Like if I make this choice, what is the trade-off that I'm making? What's what's the opportunity cost, right? What's the unintended consequence or externality of this choice? That's thinking like an economist or a public choice like analyst. But
And then how are we collectively decide, like, what are the values upon which we're collectively choosing to make those
yes,
decisions, right? Like, what are the opportunity costs that we're willing to have, you
mm-hmm.
know?
The opportunity cost
Um,
that we make right now is like how quickly can I grow my user base? That's
exactly.
mostly what we index for. But I think, and that's an easier cost to like enumerate. It's
Yeah.
much harder to enumerate the diffuse societal costs
Yes.
or societal benefits, because you're concentrating your costs or your benefits on your intended user. So you have like your ideal customer profile, and you can
Right.
track whether you're serving that customer or not serving that customer. But you're not tracking the other people that are impacted that are not your ICP, but they're definitely impacted right now
Yes.
and in future generations. That's where your externalities kind of accumulate, and we don't really have good mechanisms in economics, in public choice, or in tech for weighing those externalities, measuring them, but they do exist. We absolutely know they exist. We're just really bad at enumerating them. But
That's amazing. Which
the
is also
first,
ironic considering that we are like such a like a field that is so like so obsessed with quantification
yeah,
in so many ways. Like it's really ironic that
yeah,
we're not systematically quantifying those
yeah,
costs, even though we absolutely could with the brain power and the technology that exists.
absolutely. The best people to figure out how to build technology in a pro-social ethical way are the people building technology. It's not regulators, it's not people in Washington or in the EU, it's literally the technologists. So put it in front of the smartest people in society and they'll figure out the answer to your problem. But we're not putting it in front of people because it's not asked for by investors. Like investors don't index for that. They're indexing for totally different metrics. Founders aren't hiring on that or educating on it. So if you change the requirements for what it takes to be a software engineer, then suddenly we start building for a different set of problems. I am very confident we would figure out how to enumerate externalities, or even just to know which questions to ask if we started to make this the norm instead of the exception. When I talk about this, sometimes people tell me like, well, should we get the Gates Foundation involved? And I'm like, no, this is not a nonprofit thing. This is very much profit motivated stuff. I am sick. I am tired of the externalities that we have to deal with kicking the can down the road. Let's actually figure this out because we're the smart people in the room. It's up to us.
I love that. If you're listening and you're a developer, you heard it. And it's true. It's 100% true. And I've heard that from multiple people that I've spoken to. I mean, like, but when yeah, like when stable coins are still a big topic in the news right now, and regulators are still discussing them back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, but many of them don't even really like fully understand the nuances about them and how the reserves work and how the algorithms work, like, and obviously that's that topic. Now that stable we've seen what we've seen with stable coins and we had the big crash, like it's a topic that's going to be villainized, and it's like we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because like all of these legislators and regulators had this prediction that stablecoins would fail. Then one stablecoin did fail, and it's like it seems like it's a prophecy that came true, when in fact there was like so much nuance that went into that, and so many details that were overlooked, I think, because the rhetoric becomes the central driver of the conversation, and
But
then
I
it
mean, how
becomes
many
about
buildings did we build that crumbled because we didn't figure out how to build to code. We didn't understand the structural engineering requirements necessary to ensure something withstands wind or fire, right? It takes some experience with failure. The point is to
Yes.
understand that the failure is an input into future success. You have to learn from it instead of
Yes.
saying, well, we're never going to build a building again because that building fell. So obviously buildings are bad for society. Like that's
Yes.
what we're doing with crypto right now. Like there have been
Yes.
some failures. So instead of learning from them and so that's
And
the
creating
regulator.
methodology
Right.
around
And
avoiding
then the
them.
engineers and like the technologists, like, okay, let's actually learn from this and put
Yes.
in place some baseline standards and expectations that would earn us the title of engineers.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Now you mentioned, okay, you said there were two people that could solve this. You said founders, and then did we get to the second one, or did we did we
Founders
just
and investors. So
okay.
you have to have the financial pressure um, to realize metrics that are non-growth metrics, like so metrics that result in, I'd say, privacy respecting choices, or metrics that optimize for human autonomy, like how much agency does this person have in making like granular decisions on their choices instead of having to accept the entire like end user license agreement. Just so those are metrics that aren't easily captured, and we don't prioritize that in capital. Like capital is looking for a company to go to basically become so successful that it carries the rest of the failed portfolio. That's how risky capital works. We need to look at whether or not that is a model that still serves society's ends, because we're getting to a place where technology is so immersive and so existentially important in our daily lives that we actually need to build it with a seriousness of mind and a respect for what we create that you see in medical and legal fields and other engineering fields, but we just don't see it in tech, because in tech it's still considered like, well, I'm just building a cool app.
Right.
And then the
It's like
founders.
yes, yeah, yeah. Well, that we spoke about that, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
like as you're talking, it's like I think of you know, there was like a robot competition in my middle school. I can't remember what it was called, but there's a lot of them. There's
Oh,
a lot of robot competitions. Yeah, that
great.
was
What middle
that.
school did you go to? I didn't go to a single robot competition.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going back to school. I feel shortchanged.
Well, I didn't attend the robot competitions. I was on the theater side of things, like doing the theater clubs and stuff like that.
Me too.
In middle school, anyway. Yeah, but I remember like watching. There was some STEM. I did Destination Imagination, right? And that's like there were some technical challenges, and then there were theater challenges. And I remember watching the technical challenge. They had to like build robots, or they had to build like structures that would hold a certain amount of weight or whatever. Anyway, fast forward, 20 something years. Um, we recently, in the last couple of years, saw like the first robot police dog, right? So it's like that really is the potential of this. And it always starts as a cute, like little experiment, right? Or it always starts with like innovation is like a fun, cool thing. You can build robots, you can make smart fridges, you can like, invent things that make our lives more fun, or or they just seem like a cute little project, or something kind of techy. But like now there are robot police dogs, so like that's the real life like implications of this technology. It can be that it could have the potential to be invasive, or could have the potential to patrol, or you know what I mean, or surveil, or what have you. Like it could take so many different manifestations. And I think people hopefully you're starting to realize that, like the technology, whenever yeah, like at its fullest iteration, can serve us or not.
It's a property of an emergent system. It's really difficult to imagine how the emergent that what emerges based on just the inputs that we have. Like it's hard to imagine how a bunch of cells and DNA is going to create a human being. That's an emergent property of a bunch of like cellular technology working together the right way. Um, I don't know how to structure a human being. And I also, I don't think that the founder of Facebook had in mind when he founded Facebook that he was going to like basically help foreign governments, hack elections, but is an emergent property of the system that he built. It's really high time that we start to think about the systems we build seriously, because things emerge that we couldn't have predicted, and but we don't even start to look at those things now. We don't look at it seriously. Academia looks at it seriously, but academia doesn't bother to talk to tech.
Right, exactly. And academia tends to be yeah, it's very siloed. And we think of it as being like this place that people go to have intellectual thought experiments. But no, those thought experiments and learning how to think actually has real world applications. And it shouldn't be just this static little bubble where you talk about it and then forget about it once you leave the gates, you know? Um, we are close to time and we haven't even gotten to Lighthouse yet. So Lighthouse is, you know, a navigation engine for for the metaverse, the metaverses, I should say, which is a more accurate way of putting it. Talk a little bit about, I mean, it sounds like these are the kinds of conversations that you're having at Lighthouse, which gives me a lot of hope and encouragement. Like, and I'm pretty stingy with my hope. Like, I don't throw hope around very very loosely these
Hope
days.
for you, hope for you, hope for everyone here.
No, like I have this much hope and I like conserve it and only
Yeah,
apply it in very specific scenarios. But it does
yeah.
make I am very encouraged that like these are the kinds of conversations that you're having at Lighthouse,
Mhm.
because it tells me that you're really building this search engine technology with
Yeah,
that 1,000-foot view and thinking about what this could look like in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50
absolutely.
years. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, so first of all, I think the problem space is really interesting. We have ample ways to search the semantic web, right? We can find things on it. We can find web pages that give us the information, but how do we search a spatial web? Like, how do we find places and people and experiences? So that alone as a problem space is fascinating to me. Search has unlocked the internet for us, and search is going to unlock the metaverse for the next, billion or 2 billion users. If they can't find what they're looking for, if they can't find friends or experiences that are relevant to them, then it's really difficult to onboard, because then the end user has to be like, well, which metaverse do I even go to? Like, they have to get started in a much more frictionful way. But also search carries with it all these implications for what are we searching for, and does the person or group of people that created the data that I'm now searching, did they consent for this information to be searchable? Do they have robust controls over the access to their information? So these are the kinds of questions that Lighthouse was grappling with when they got in touch with me. They're like, so we're thinking about these things and you're writing about these things. Can we like join forces, right? Because if we could solve search and make it fully consensual, make it so that we're looking for the things that people want to be found, and not like, you know, hacking information together, and like, re-anonymize or like de-anonymizing people. That's a really bad way to go. And that's kind of how search works now in Web 2. That's a lot of what powers the ad tech industry. And I know that there's a better way to do it.
So you're saying like if I had my what did you call it? User owned identity.
Yeah.
We'll call it a user owned identity token.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully that's not like copyrighted somewhere. If
No.
I have my user owned identity token
Mhm.
and like somebody searches me in Lighthouse,
Yeah.
like I can say whether I want them to see my Pinterest board or whether I want them to see what I've been up to in
Yeah.
Decentraland, what concerts I've gone to or whatever. Like I can customize what is visible, what's not visible when someone
Ideally, think of
searches
it
my
like
name.
signal. Think of it like signal that you're emitting. You can choose to emit less or more signal, or you can choose to emit signal under certain conditions. Like, I only want the signal to reach this group of people for this amount of time in this place, but not in other places. And we can't solve that problem at all at like Lighthouse ourselves. It's an ecosystem play. Like, in order for anything in the metaverse to work, and in order for Lighthouse to work, in order for any of us to really enjoy a metaverse the way that we've read about, and the way that it's, our imaginations have been captured, we are going to need everybody that's building the metaverse to work together on what are the data rails that should be like readable, so interoperable. How do we manage avatars and identities? Where do consent preferences get stored? It's really a big ecosystem play of like everybody holding hands together and saying, how do we build this the right way? Because our end of the metaverse is search. We're not building identity, but I know that identity is a big part of the search question. So this is why this is such a huge and interesting problem space for me. It's just figuring out how to work with the right teams to build the future we want to live in, and not just like live with.
So two questions. So I just, whenever I was giving my example, I mixed Web 2 and Web 3. I said I don't want, like, let's say that I don't want people to see my Pinterest board and I don't want them to see what I'm doing in Decentraland. Do you conceptualize it to where Lighthouse is a place where people go and they can see both Web 2 and Web 3 activity in the same place? Like, do you consider Web 2 as a part of the metaverse? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, good question. So technologically, right now they're very different,
Okay.
um, but it
Meaning
doesn't.
like Pinterest isn't built on blockchain, for example, right? Like I
Right,
don't
exactly.
need a MetaMask wallet to access my
Right.
Pinterest board.
Right. But to the end user 5 or 10 years from now, they're not going to care whether it's Web 1, Web 2, or Web 3. They're just looking for a seamless, useful experience where they can find the people, friends, and things that they're looking for. And so I think the future is actually going to be a mix of like centralized store, decentralized computation. We're still iterating on that. We're still figuring out what works. We're building a lot of the infrastructure now, which is, why I've always been like a bear market baby. This is so much more fun than just like trying to get people to understand, hey, identity in the middle of like NFT,
Oh my
um,
God.
like in the middle of like Art Basel, where everyone's just like, the be all and end all is how much I can make on this art project. And I'm like, that's cool, but
Ugh.
does anybody understand that we're like reinventing value? It's the most important thing that's happened since like Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. And does anybody see that? But
Right.
now people see it because it's like quiet. And now the people that are here to build have stayed, and the people that were here to show have largely kind of like lost their cojones.
Yes. I love it. I know.
Yeah.
I went through like a period where I was just like questioning my life choices, and then I got a lot of fortitude by talking to veterans who were just kind of like, welcome. Like, this is where, first of all, this is where all the magic happens, or in these bear markets. And secondly, like, this isn't the first, nor will it be the last. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're getting your sea legs right now. Like, enjoy it and embrace the process, embrace the emotional ups and downs. And then yeah, like once the kind of like emotion piece lifts and you're not kind of clouded by all of the stress and the euphoria and the hype, then there is like this kind of clarity that overcomes it, and you kind of do start to see solutions and you start to see possibilities. At least that's been the experience for me, like you just start to kind of see all the implications once the dust settles. You can kind of evaluate with a little bit more sobriety and
With sobriety, exactly. You're not drunk on hype anymore. Um, FUD isn't considered FUD. It's considered, criticism to make the thing better. I should listen to this criticism because it's not meant in a bad way. It's meant to show me the weaknesses in the thing I'm architecting. We're getting a lot more serious now, and I think that's actually really exciting. If you're not a fair weather founder, but you're here to actually build and tackle the really tough, interesting, like first principles questions.
one last question
Mhm.
is, can you talk a little bit about the experience of being in an incubator like Kernel? We haven't talked about that yet on this show, and I think the audience would really benefit from that. Like if someone's considering, applying for kind of an incubator program, what advice do you have for them? Was it worth it? What value did you get out of it? Obviously it was, but
Yeah,
just speak to a little, specifically for people who are trying to make that decision.
it was brilliant. And Lighthouse is not the only thing that came out of it. I actually started a discourse club for people who are interested in crypto and privacy. It's called Yeet. If you're interested in joining, get in
Yeah.
touch.
Is it
Um,
YEET?
YEET. And it's a vetted discourse club, so we're actually very careful about how we build the community. But if you're interested in exploring privacy and crypto, get in. So that's one of the things that I actually started at Kernel. What I would say to someone who's applying to Kernel is to be very clear with what you want out of it, with what you're exploring. You could even just say like, I'm not sure which track or am I here for health tech? Am I here for NFTs? Am I here for DeFi? Like, you don't have to know that, but you do have to have a real reason for why this is interesting to you in the first place, because they're looking for people who are in touch with their curiosity, and who want to share their curiosity, so that because put two curious people together, they'll start exploring, they'll start building something. Yeah, and it's just, there's so many brilliant people that are amazing about finding people who are not just smart, but intellectually humble and who aren't afraid to ask questions. So that being intellectually humble is kind of important if you're going to admit that you don't know and ask the question. So yeah, so humility, curiosity, a real reason for why this is interesting to you at all, even if you don't actually know where you want to go. Certainly a lot of people are exploring, but
Amazing.
Go do it.
I typically end with a question of what does it take for someone to become the next quote unquote master of Web3? But you kind of just answered that question, like
Yeah.
intellectual humility, curiosity, and
Yeah.
yeah, like a passion around solving problems and iterating.
Yeah. And trust, actually.
Okay.
I think the ironic thing about crypto is that we talk about trustless.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, I haven't gotten that answer yet.
Yeah, it's actually about building trust in small places where you are working with a community of people that share your values or share your vision of the world. Um, and you want to coordinate with them to actually make that vision a reality. It's all based on trust. Our trust has been fractured in society because of the way that we optimize for like outrage and gamified hype, because we don't work in small communities anymore. We work in like one to many. Like I tweet and I'm I'm speaking to an audience of potentially millions, and that's what I'm actually asked to. That's what Twitter wants me to do. It wants me to become a micro celebrity. That's the like incentive structure, and that actually creates these like really antisocial dynamics that we're now recreating from scratch in crypto through things like DAOs, and really like Ethereum is a giant coordination layer for people that share values. um, it's about rebuilding trust in small, real Dunbar number sized communities of people that want to make the world better.
Oh my God, I love that. Mm. Ah, I feel so happy and whole.
Oh, I'm glad.
Mic drop.
Yeah. In
uh.
order to drop the mic, I'd have to like boom.
I know, right? Let me just unscrew it first and then.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Anastasia, thank you so much for coming on. This was such a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it so
Had a
much,
lot of
and I know that
fun.
the audience has benefited from it as well. Um, yeah. Where do people follow
That was a
you
lot.
and follow Lighthouse?
Yeah. So Lighthouse.world.
Okay.
Um, Great place to start. So you can get all our socials, our Discord, just even understand the mission and why it's key. To find me, it's Anastasia U on Twitter, or Anna, .mira.xyz, to read all my long-winded thoughts on how to build an agentic future of human dignity and technology,
Amazing.
if that's interesting.
Go do it. You'll be better for it. I'm getting through it. I have ADHD, so I'm like, I read a little bit and then I like process and it rocks my world
Yeah,
for like 3 days. And then I come back, I read a little more, and then I go off and I process and let my
that's the
world
way to
erupt.
approach it.
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff.
Exactly. Take it slow and steady.
Yeah,
All right, y'all. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap there. And thank you so much again.
thank you.